Good evening, folks, and welcome to Woodstock Regional Artist. I'm your host, Sal Michio, coming to you from my home studio in West Hurley, New York, along with our producer engineer, David Lax, at the controls at Studio A in Saugerties, New York. Tonight, we have a different show for you. We have three guests who will discuss the new rules that Facebook is imposing on musicians and live streaming. So, without further ado, we'll introduce our first guest.
Good evening. We have a special guest tonight, Doug Yoel. Doug's been performing and recording original classic music since the late 90s. He spent a decade producing greats in jazz and blues and earning Grammy nominations and International Grammy Awards with people like Roy Haynes, Lucky Peterson, and Mingus Big Band. I understand you're a lifelong DJ and a record collector. Doug's been back on the decks as of late, spinning music at Hudson Valley events with JTD Productions and hosting the Blues Break program on Radio Woodstock, WDST. We're here tonight to talk about some of the new Facebook rules. A lot of musicians who are doing Facebook Live are very concerned about something that came out recently. The rules, as I understand, were established in 2018, but they've changed. And according to Facebook now, I'm going to read this to you. These supplemental terms apply if you post or share any videos or other content containing music on any Facebook product. You are responsible for the content of your post. People use our products to share content with their family and friends. Keep in mind, you remain solely responsible for the content that you post, including any music that features in the content. Nothing in these terms constitutes any authorization by us with respect to use music on any of our products. Use of music for commercial or non-commercial purposes, in particular, is prohibited unless you have obtained appropriate licensing. You may not use videos on our products to create a music listening experience. We want you to be able to enjoy videos posted by family and friends. However, if you use videos on our products to create a music listening experience for yourself or for others, your videos will be blocked and your page, profile, or group may be deleted. These include live. I'm sure they mean live performance. Unauthorized
Probably
content.
Facebook Live. I think
Facebook Live, yes.
Facebook Live.
Unauthorized content may be removed. If you post content that contains music owned by someone else, your content may be blocked or may be reviewed by the applicable rights owner and removed if your use of the music is not properly authorized. You may not be able to post or access videos containing music in every country of the world. We want you to be able to share videos with your family and friends wherever they are, but any music in your video, if it is allowed at all, may not be available in all countries of the world. So that's the statement they made. What do you have to comment about that?
I think for the most part, that is Facebook's way of saying hands off. This isn't us. It's our servers, but what you put up here is your representation of yourself. And if that representation includes someone else's copyright, then it's on you. But the thing to remember is that the music on the internet is and always has been, to an extent, the Wild West. Because a lot of what happens from the very beginning is things that have not really had their own license made up for yet. And then eventually those licenses do become reality when the major companies agree with each other what they want them to mean. And by major companies, I mean the major labels and the major publishers and the major hosts like Facebook and YouTube and so on. So what I hear in this is that Facebook is not intending to make a blanket license arrangement like YouTube has done. YouTube went for a different business model. YouTube decided to make deals with all of the different record companies and music publishers to allow certain things to happen for royalty on the back end. And in doing that, they've also made agreements so that they can somehow monetize what they do, which they do through their subscription service now and through advertising. Facebook was looking into that at the beginning of the pandemic, and they told those of us who are regularly webcasting that they would be coming up with a platform that would make it possible to monetize the live streamed performances. The Facebook, I'm sorry, I should use the right word. Facebook Live performances. Live stream is another brand, another service. What started to happen when the gigs went away and all of the musicians began giving concerts on Facebook Live, and I did it, and I find it to be a wonderful platform. And the way that Facebook integrates the live video and with that live performances is wonderful.
Right.
But in that brought these new liabilities with copyright, where they don't really have a means of policing the content that's put up there. I'll give you an example. If I put up a video on Instagram, which is owned by Facebook, and they're linked together, so I could put up a video, and I've done this before. I put up a video of like my record playing and a famous record, a Led Zeppelin record playing.
Yeah.
And what will happen is they'll show the video, they'll put on a second of the sound, and then they'll fade the sound down, because that's violating the copyright. And there are bots that come in and they say, oh, I know that's Led Zeppelin when the levee breaks, and they turn the sound off. When you are performing a live concert, they don't really have the technology to figure out that you're doing your version of when the levee breaks and that you owe somebody money. So this is their way of kind of putting the brakes on that and putting it on you to have the rights to do what you're doing with your performances. And if you're performing your own music, it's no problem, because you own your own music, or you have a stake in it at least with your publishing company, and you have that right. But when you start performing other people's music, then you're opening yourself up, and everybody else handling that, and in this case it would be Facebook, you're opening them up to lawsuits because you do not have a synchronization license.
I see.
And synchronization license is one of the few music licenses that is completely open to negotiation. There's no standard synchronization license. If I play a Bob Dylan song, Bob Dylan can charge me any price he wants. And, or can just say, no, you can't use it. And that happens all the time. That's why some songs get into movies and some songs don't. The stakes are high because the lawsuits can be for millions of dollars. I know, because I was a part of some of those lawsuits on both ends of it. I've been part of the rights holder argument and suing a company, and I've also been sued because of music that I represented and questions about that. Right. The important thing is that they're not blocking music from their service. We can still have performances on Facebook. I'm sure they're not going to block it. I'm sure they don't want to take themselves out of that that realm and give that business to other places exclusively. They want in on that, I think, my opinion, but they do want to put the brakes on it to an extent, so that if Warner Music decides that, hey, you're doing an hour of music that we own, you're doing a Grateful Dead concert and we own all those songs, then we could stop that. The matter is, a lot of this is automated. There really is nobody home.
That's true.
For that reason, this really poses a problem for people playing recorded music. If you're a DJ and you're spinning records on on a live platform like Facebook Live, this probably is going to stop that. That is a fact.
It seems like the DJs are definitely a big target on this thing. I'm going to read something now that I found on the web from Social Media Today. Facebook clarifies guidelines around music usage and video posts. Facebook is looking to clarify its rules around how creators are allowed to use music in their content, while it is also adding a new indicator in Facebook and Instagram live streams to help people avoid potential copyright issues. And then they quote what Facebook says, which we already read. And it says Facebook established a new set of agreements back in 2018 with publishers. And it's been looking in ways to integrate song snippets, short pieces, and music options into various tools. But at times, users do still face removals and challenges because of the sounds they include in their uploaded clips. To avoid this, Facebook has outlined 4 guidelines for permissible use of music, covering both Facebook and Instagram. Does Facebook own Instagram? Is that why
Facebook does own Instagram,
yeah. So here are the 4 points. There are no limits on things like music in stories, traditional musical performance, e.g. filming a live artist or a band performing. Another one is the greater the number of full-length recording tracks in a video, the more likely it will be limited. Shorter clips of music are recommended. There should always be a visual component to your video. Recorded audio shall not be the primary purpose of the video. And it says those pointers make sense and align with general copyright rules. That's how DJs like D Nice have been able to throw quarantine dance parties on IG Live.
That's Instagram Live.
Okay, Instagram Live.
Yeah.
While others providing videos via Facebook have faced restrictions.
Instagram does seem to operate in a different way, and you can put clips of a record on Instagram, but you have to select the music through Instagram in order for it to stay.
The general copyright rule of thumb here is that you can use elements of music so long as it does not equate to a significant amount of your original work. There's a question around what qualifies as significant. That's your Wild West you were talking about.
Argument.
Well, this has been very useful and helpful. You're a plethora of information. Is there anything else you feel that would be useful to musicians in the area as far as their performance on Facebook?
Keep doing it. Just keep going, and I would maybe focus on music that you own, and if you don't own music, then just tread gently. I wouldn't do like a 2-hour tribute to Michael Jackson right now. Everyone knows about Facebook jail, and they put you on ice for a month. Odds are that kind of thing will happen. You'll get a notice, and you'll get kind of slapped on the wrist before you get canceled and you're in trouble. And I mean, unless you do something that's really asking for it.
Well, Doug, I want to thank you for helping us out on this show. And
I'm happy to. It was a pleasure. I love the show. I've been watching it, and I love what you guys are doing. I appreciate what you guys do very much.
And now I'd like to introduce a special guest who is an attorney in the music industry. He handles music industry transactions. He does copyright counseling and trademark management. He is Eric C. Lauritsen, Esquire. Good evening, Eric. It's good to have you aboard.
Hi, thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Okay, so we're going to start today with reading just some of the highlights of the Facebook guidelines that came out recently. And they are 4 points that I've come up with here. Facebook says you are responsible for the content of your post. Use of music for commercial or non-personal purposes, you have to have the rights to use, the licensing rights. You may not use videos on our products to create a music listening experience. And I understand that what that means is a listening experience is defined as something like listening to Spotify or Pandora, where you're just listening to music, one song after another. They want it to be interactive. And any unauthorized content may be removed by them. So Eric, can you comment on some of this?
The first point that I would make is that in fact these Facebook guidelines as they relate to music that I think you were reading from or at least summarizing, they have been in effect without revision according to some research that I did this afternoon since at least mid 2018. So this concept of Facebook wanting to guide the use of music on its service in basically the ways you described is actually not a new thing. The new thing that has inspired a lot of questions with respect to how Facebook is dealing with music has to do with the change that Facebook has announced to its terms of service that doesn't specifically by its terms talk about music. What it says is that Facebook is going to basically reserve the right to take stuff down and to block access to stuff if they believe doing so will protect them. In other words, if they fear that leaving it up will create liability for them. And that's true with respect to, that could be applied with respect to music, but it could be applied with respect to a lot of the fake news type things that we hear a lot about. The first thing I would try to advise an artist client on would just be to kind of calibrate their understanding as to the nature of these of what is being changed and what isn't being changed. But of course, not to diminish the fact that there are important Facebook policies that relate to music, and that the current change, while it could touch other things as well, it could be applied with respect to the use of music on Facebook. So it's of course important to understand. I would start by trying to advise a client how Facebook wants to be used, apparently, according to these policies when it comes to music. And it really is framing itself as a place for active engagement. What they don't want is to be a place where people go as a substitute for Spotify. As YouTube, for example, has become, or maybe has always been, a substitute for pure audio services, simply because people can put on a video and sit back and not actually watch the video, but just consume the audio content. And Facebook doesn't want that.
The goal that I mentioned that Facebook seems to have of being used not as a passive music service, but as a service in which people are actively engaging with the videos they're viewing. Even some of the examples from the list that didn't on their face sound like it. For example, the one about including multiple songs within the same video, or having a longer video. Those are, that rule, when I hear that, I think of YouTube videos that are entire albums, where they'll just play through the entire album. And so that's something that Facebook apparently has identified as being associated with passive music consumption, the kind of thing that they want to avoid.
Very interesting stuff. They also write that the general copyright rule of thumb here is that you can use elements of music so long as it doesn't equate to be the significant part of your original work. And finally, it says to help avoid such issues, I didn't know this, but Facebook has created a free sound library for creators to use when they want some incidental music or something behind them, and it's copyright-free music clips and samples. Sure. So they're really trying to, it seems like they're trying to be cooperative in this and also protect themselves and protect the rights of the owners of the music. So.
I think so. And the other thing that comes to my mind too is that they're trying to come up with one set of policies that will apply across the board to any kind of video, and these videos some of them are going to be purely music videos. For example, especially during the pandemic, there's an ever-growing number of musicians who are live streaming concerts. And the music on the concert is the driving force of the show. They're coming up with one set of policies that's going to apply to all different kinds of videos. And these practices and the making available of a copyright-free library of music makes sense and is a nice solution with respect to some videos. And that's certainly going to alleviate some of Facebook's copyright concerns and some of artists' copyright concerns if they're posting a vlog or something like that, where it's a person talking about his or her life, whatever it may be. But that sort of policy is not going to be helpful to a cover artist who is trying to live stream a performance to earn some extra income during the pandemic, and is performing songs that are owned by third parties and subject to those third parties' copyright concerns, and might get taken down or muted, which is apparently something that Facebook does in this space.
So you're saying that if you're live streaming originals, that's legitimate?
Yes. Well, so when you say originals, if the issue it all has to do with copyright ownership. So if you are a singer-songwriter, you write your own music, and you perform the music that you write, there are copyrights being implicated in what you're performing, but you own those copyrights. Nobody's going to shut you down. But if you are a cover artist and you want to go perform a David Bowie song or something as part of your live stream, technically the copyright in that David Bowie song is owned by any number of publishers who would have the right to stop your performance. And most of the time they wouldn't exercise that right, and as all of these major music industry players have, the publishers and the record labels have begun, I think, recognizing over the last 10 or 15 years that unauthorized uses of music on the internet are not going anywhere, and you're better off trying to monetize them than trying to shut them down. And so YouTube and now Facebook as well have schemes for how to compensate David Bowie's publishers, and then in turn David Bowie, when a cover artist performs his song as part of a live stream.
When does a tune become public domain? I've heard that if something is really old, it becomes public domain.
Really old.
How old?
Really old. It's 70 years after an author dies in most cases. So an author, a songwriter who died in 1950, I guess, those works are starting to enter the public domain. It's a notorious, a running joke among copyright lawyers that every time Mickey Mouse is set to enter the public domain, the term of copyright extends. There was a period for 7 or 8 years at least recently in which nothing entered the public domain because the term had extended. But fortunately, we're on the other side of that now. But it really is very old works. We're talking about things from the 20s that are entering the public domain. Anything older than that, you should be safe copying it. But there's not a lot of samples going around of works that are that old. There wasn't recording for that much longer.
But it's also my understanding that if you do a parody, you can use a song. Is that correct?
Often, yes.
You change all the words, but keep the melody, and you do a funny song.
Yes, so that speaks to what's known as the fair use defense. Word to the wise in that area is that the fair use defense is most available to works that are commenting, at least in the space of parody. It's important that the work be commenting on the original and not be just changing the words of a famous song to talk about some current political situation that has nothing to do with the subject matter of the song. Right. So that's the difference under the law anyway. I'm not sure if Oxford Dictionary agrees with this, but as the law treats it, that's the difference between parody, which is a fair use, versus satire, which is ordinarily not.
I have something written by Kevin Bruner from Do It Yourself Musician. He's a blogger. And he says, here are some 3 things you can do to avoid having a problem on Facebook Live as a performer. He says, move. For real. He says, if you don't move, it's a listening experience. But if you're moving, it's a social interactive experience. So he's suggesting that if you're strumming your guitar, move. He says, take your talk to your audience between songs and ask questions of your audience. And this would change it from a listening experience to an interactive concert. And that would lessen your chance of having a problem.
That makes sense because, again, it has to do with interactivity and making it something other than a pure kind of listening music experience. If a video doesn't, if the performer in a video is not moving around, that suggests that people probably wouldn't be consuming that video and that content for the purpose of the video, and all they actually care about is the audio. Advice as far as moving around. It's interesting when you apply it to different genres within the music industry, some of which don't involve all that much movement by the performers. For example, a DJ who's performing a live set might be standing behind a turntable and not doing very much moving.
That's example you give, yeah.
Yeah. That creates its own issues, though, because, and it's one thing I to put out on the table that's in the background with a lot of these questions, is the two copyrights that are involved in music. One is a copyright that is owned by, at least initially, by the person who writes a song, the stuff that can be represented on sheet music. It's known under the law as a musical composition. There's a separate copyright involved with a particular recording of a performance of that musical composition, and that's the sound recording copyright. So someone who is performing live, a singer-songwriter who is performing live, is making use of a musical composition. But because, you know, with a singer-songwriter, you're imagining a live guitar or something like that, they're not using any pre-existing sound recording. With a DJ who is spinning turntables, they're going to be implicating both of those copyrights, both the sound recording and the musical composition, and that's a whole other layer of rights that you would need, which in turn it means people who could shut you down if they decided they didn't want you doing what you're doing.
So we have a number of clubs that won't hire any bands that do cover tunes. They only want to hire originals because they don't want to pay some kind of a fee. I guess there's a ASCAP and a VMI fee or something.
That's exactly what that's about. So that has to do with the owner of a copyright has the right to, they get 6 exclusive rights. One of them is the right to publicly perform a work. So it's very logistically difficult to police who's performing your works if you are a songwriter. You can't be at every concert venue at all times. You can't hear every radio station at all times. And so these songwriters and the publishers who own their copyrights contract out that responsibility to organizations like ASCAP and BMI, who are set up to do that difficult job of figuring out how much each different composition is being used and to pay royalties accordingly. And so the way that works at, for example, a live music venue or a club would need to pay like a subscription. It might be a monthly or annual subscription license that you pay to each of ASCAP and BMI, and then you self-report, or else, you know, that there is some sort of way that it gets monitored what musical works are performed within the club, and ASCAP and BMI will distribute the royalties accordingly. And so it is costly. And so a club might want to avoid having to pay for those sorts of licenses. And so instead, that's why they might have a policy like the one you described. You can play here, but only if you sing songs that you wrote. ASCAP and BMI, you can buy a license for public performances if you have live musical performances, if you're a concert venue or a club like we just talked about. You can also get them if you're a radio station. You can also get them if you are an online streaming service, because those are considered public performances as well. And so YouTube, for one, does have licenses from ASCAP and BMI. I assume Facebook probably does as well. And so you would have a license in that regard. I think the issue is that there are also other rights beyond the mere right to public performance that are implicated if you are making a video in which you're performing a work. And those other rights don't have a central clearinghouse like ASCAP or BMI. They'd have to go straight through the publisher directly. And that's where the publisher might have an opportunity to say, no, we don't want to do this. Even if the performance right was licensed through ASCAP or BMI, I don't know if it would be the derivative work right license or maybe some other right that would give them a hook to, if you had a reclusive artist or a reclusive publisher who said, I don't want to monetize this, I don't want it to exist. And there are a few of those out there. That would be their hook, I think, for getting the performance taken off of Facebook.
Very useful information.
Very interesting, yes.
Is there something else, Eric, that you could think of that would be helpful for viewers to hear?
I would tell them that this new Facebook rule change, that I guess I talked a little bit about what it isn't, but I didn't talk necessarily about what it is. And so what I would quickly say anyway, at least, this change that is going into effect on October 1, what it does is it gives Facebook discretion by its language. It gives Facebook discretion to take stuff down if Facebook is worried about its own liability. I wouldn't expect that language or that revision to have very much of an effect on a songwriter who is performing his or her own original works as part of a live stream or a recorded performance and posting it to their Facebook page. Because so much of this is done automatically, where there's melody detection software. And so your song might be original, but someone might think it's theirs. The likelihood of your content being taken down or shut down at some point, that hasn't changed. Facebook and some of these other networks are excellent places to go promote yourself. And it's like a necessary ingredient in launching yourself as an artist these days. And so it's good to familiarize yourself with these policies and with these changes. But it's also good to, I'd say, keep using the service and connect with your fans and do everything you can to grow your fan base.
Eric, it's been very informative, and I'm sure a lot of folks might want to get in touch with you for your assistance. So would you give us a way that you could be contacted?
Sure. I'm glad to help. I'll start with my website. It's LAURITSENESQ.com. It's my last name, Lauritsen, and then ESQ as in Esquire.com. My email is eric@lauritsenesq.com. And phone number, if you'd like to reach out, I'm happy to provide. It's 805-705-6255. I guess I would point out I'm in California, so my business hours might be a little bit different from those of your viewers, but I'd be happy to speak with anybody.
Terrific. We really want to thank you. It's been very informative, and I'm sure our viewers will deem so also. And we want to thank you to spend that time with us today. And hopefully we'll maybe hear from you in the future.
Sounds great. Well, thank you guys.
Be safe from the fires, and thank you again, and we'll be in touch soon.
Our next guest is a professional musician and a multi-instrumentalist who is coming to us from Alexandria, Virginia, and he will contribute to our conversation on Facebook rules on music. He is Lane Stowe. Good evening, Lane.
Good
Welcome,
evening.
Lane. Thanks for coming.
Good to have you.
You got it.
You had sent me an article called Dark Times for Musicians, and it's a fascinating article about what happened to someone you actually know. And perhaps
Right.
you can tell us a little bit about the articles, and then we'll talk about your personal experiences with performances.
Okay. The article was in regards to the current new rule that has been passed down by Facebook. And that is they're really trying to, and I'm assuming it's for licensing reasons more than anything else, they're very concerned about people playing other artists' music. So they have put something out saying at this point, effective October 1st, you're not going to support on any of their platforms anybody live streaming a concert. And the concern that I have, obviously, about this is, this, right now, especially because of COVID, this is one form of people as a major source of income. I have a lot of friends who right now, their only source of income is performing live online with GoFundMe or Venmo or PayPal. And to take that away right now, it's doing more harm than good. When I think about it, I think about the fact that, okay, I respect the fact that they don't want people doing other artists' music. But if ever there was a time to slightly bend the rule, I don't think if somebody plays Eleanor Rigby on their guitar in their living room, that Paul McCartney's going to be outraged about the royalties that he's missing out. And for some people, like I said, this is it right now. We have no idea when we're going to go back to what was considered the norm, where bars are open, clubs are open, we're doing weddings, we're doing corporate events. And it's a really significant issue right now. We were talking before we went live. I have a professor when I was at Ithaca College School of Music. His name was Rick Beato, and Rick is actually featured in this article. Rick is a very accomplished musician. I mean, he's worked with Ben Taylor, James Taylor's son. He's done a lot of production, a lot of music. I mean, he's just brilliant. He actually wrote a book called the Beato Book, which really goes in depth in understanding modes, chords, name it. And I guess what had happened was he was using maybe, 4 measures of a Beatles song to give an example of a Mixolydian mode. And he was notified that that clip was not allowed to be used. And I guess because of the support of his 1.7 million followers, I guess they did get that reinstated. But it goes back to my point of he's trying to instruct somebody. It's not even trying to do it for profit. It's okay, this is how I teach, and now I can't even use examples.
Well, isn't there something called fair use for teachers?
There should be a fair use, and that's what his argument was that this should fall under that category. I think Facebook was so geared into, okay, that's not his music, let's stop it, instead of saying, wait a minute, what's the correct vetting process here? Is it fair, or is it something that's in violation? And, I'm glad that they reinstated that. I'll give an example that something that happened to me, which is actually kind of funny. I was getting my car washed. And I was going through the car wash, and for fun, I decided to put it on Facebook Live just to be silly. I was listening to, I think, Paul Schaefer's Late Night tune. Get through the car wash. 5 minutes later, I get a notification from Facebook saying, you've used the following song, Paul Schaefer, Late Night. And I'm thinking, okay, did I cost him a royalty?
Right.
And then it goes one step further. You go to a wedding. More often than not, there's a DJ. Before the wedding starts, they're playing cocktail music. And it could be something like Diana Krall or Nat King Cole. And that's never been an issue. And now I get the fact that the theory behind it, but now is the time to say, okay, how can we support those people who are currently not making their regular income because of COVID? They have an opportunity to do something where they can still entertain, have some type of revenue stream until things go back to the quote unquote normal. I remember this back in the early 2000s, the whole thing with Napster. And, everybody was so outraged because they were downloading music and no royalties. This is it's similar but different. People are playing music because they need to live, they need to eat. Right now, you have unbelievably talented people on Broadway who are making no money right now. Broadway was supposed to open in September. Now it's 2021. Who knows if that could be pushed back to 2022? The Met just announced that there will be no opera until September of 2021.
How do these people survive?
Do? And I'm sure a lot of them are teaching using Skype. I would hope so. But it still goes back to the fact that, okay, if you're a performer and you teach, that's fantastic. You can still use that as your opportunity, as your main revenue stream.
Right.
But if you're a performer who doesn't teach, what do you do?
You shared with me before we went on the air a story about a performance you did at a wedding and how everybody was temped during the COVID. Could you describe that to the audience?
Yeah, I played a private party with my band, the Ryan Forster Band, back in the end of July. It was the second to last Saturday in July. And it was a private party at a house. It was a huge pool party, actually. I mean, it was a mansion, let's just be honest. So what had happened was, prior to the event, all of the guests had to be tested for COVID, and they had to test negative. And all of the musicians, who they kept the band very socially distanced, when we got there, you had to have temperature checks. And then they actually came around again and said, all right, one more round of temperature checks to make sure. And I was still very, I was thankful. I wore my mask except for when I was singing. I just figured, you know what? I'm going to try to be as safe as possible, because who knows? I don't want to infect anybody else, and I don't know if everybody else has that same mindset. But I like the fact that they took as many precautions as they could to still have an event with live music.
It may be the new normal.
Yeah, it may
Right.
be the new normal. And
Right.
right now, with restaurants only open at 25% capacity, they can't afford to have live music.
Of course, it has to be indiscriminately voiced, and there are some fans of the people that are playing that put on their website, Facebook site, that this you'll see some indiscriminate music by so and so and so and so. Otherwise, the state liquor authorities come out and slap you with a fine. And this
Right.
is all outdoor stuff, and it's all tip jar stuff, and it's mostly all acoustic stuff.
Right.
With maybe 3 or less performers, and that's not making a living, that's for sure.
I would probably say the best thing that we can do for musicians is, more than anything else, support each other. One of the things that I did back even in normal times, I love doing fundraiser gigs. We did a gig here in Alexandria after Hurricane Harvey 3 years ago, and we raised $2,000 on a Sunday afternoon. And right now, that's why it's so important that we still have live music online more than ever, because that is going to be a great opportunity for musicians, not just to, make an income, but they're still communicating with their fans, their followers. The whole point of Facebook, it's social media, the keyword being social. And that's why I would hope that, if anything, I would hope that they would reach out to ASCAP and BMI and say, look, what can we do? How can we better resolve this issue?
Well said.
True.
Well said.
Really.
You're seeing like pop-up drive-in movie theaters and everything now because of this. I put out an idea of, why don't they do Broadway performances at at MetLife Stadium? Okay, so you don't have all the scenery, but you give people a chance to buy tickets, be socially
Right.
distanced, open up some refreshment stands, just like they're doing for the NFL right now,
Mm-hmm.
have a capacity of only so many people, and it would be like the ultimate theater in the round.
Right.
But
True.
except in the round, you have 100 yards to work with,
That's interesting.
or even
I-
half the state. But use these venues. Use
Yeah.
Madison Square Garden. Use any NBA arena not being used right now because they're playing in a bubble. And
The
be creative
the
and
fi-
give these performers a chance to perform and make a living again.
That's very well said. The Phoenicia Festival of the Voice did a drive-in movie theater opera where they
That's what I mean.
performed on the stage and people sat in their cars.
Yeah. And that's what, these things have to keep going for now, especially if this opportunity of performing online is taken away. And,
Sure.
the best thing I can do is, if I have friends who I know are doing a socially distanced gig in the area, I try to go.
Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Absolutely. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, it was a pleasure having you, and we've learned some good things tonight. So
Thank you, Sal. Much appreciated.
that's our show for this evening, folks. We've learned a lot this evening, and I hope you have also. And so until next week, when we have another special guest, I want you to be safe out there and support your local musicians in any way you can. Thank you, and good night.